Chapter 1. The Forgotten Shrine. The night was thick with humidity, the air heavy with an unshakable stillness as the van rumbled along a narrow dirt road. Tall trees loomed over the path, their twisted branches forming claw-like silhouettes against the dim moonlight. Inside the van, 5 friends, Nate, Ploy, Win, Fa, and Benz, were on their way to a remote Thai village, eager to uncover forgotten folklore for their documentary project. "This is it," Nate, the group's leader, announced, tracing a finger along the creased map on his lap. "The village should be just ahead. We're about to make history." Ploy sat in the back seat, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Unlike the others, excitement didn't stir in her chest, only unease. "Or we're about to walk into something we shouldn't," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the engine's hum. Benz let out a dry laugh, rolling his eyes. "Come on, Ploy. It's just a shrine. What's the worst that could happen?" The question hung in the air like an ill omen, unanswered. As they neared the village, a sudden gust of wind sent dry leaves skittering across the road. The jungle, which had been eerily quiet, now rustled with unseen movement. Fa shivered, rubbing her arms as the temperature seemed to drop. The others didn't seem to notice. The village appeared ahead, a collection of wooden houses on stilts, nestled in the embrace of the dense jungle. Flickering oil lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the dirt paths. The moment the van pulled to a stop, an unsettling silence settled over the place. Villagers, mostly elderly, their faces lined with age and hardship, stood frozen in their doorways, their eyes filled with something unreadable. Wariness, fear. Wind shifted uneasily. "They're looking at us like we don't belong here." "Maybe we don't," Fa whispered. Before anyone could respond, a frail yet commanding voice broke the silence. "You should not be here." An old man stepped forward from the gathering crowd, his face lined with deep wrinkles. His gaze was sharp, unwavering. Nate, ever the diplomat, stepped forward with a polite smile. "Sawadi crap, Uncle. We're just here to learn about the history of this place. We heard there's an old shrine nearby. Could you tell us about it?" The moment the word shrine left Nate's lips, the villagers stiffened. A woman clutched her small child closer, muttering a prayer under her breath. The old man, Chai, let out a long, tired sigh. "The shrine is cursed," he said simply. "No one has set foot there in decades. If you value your lives, you will leave it alone." Ploy's stomach twisted. She wanted to turn back, to listen to the man's warning, but she knew Nate too well. He wouldn't back down. "Maybe we should listen to them," she whispered. Benz scoffed. "Oh, come on. Every old village has some spooky story. It's just superstition." Chai's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is not just a story. It is a warning. Those who disturb the shrine do not return the same." Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then, as if in response to his words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the village, making the oil lamps flicker violently. The jungle beyond seemed to whisper. Nate turned back to the group with a smirk. "Well, guess we know where we're going tomorrow." Ploy shivered, but no one else argued. From the shadows, Chai watched them walk away, his gaze heavy with sorrow. That night, the first omen. The guest house was a modest wooden structure with a thatched roof, its creaky floorboards whispering under their footsteps. Inside, the air was thick with humidity, carrying and something else. Something sour, almost rotten. Night fell quickly in the jungle. Outside, crickets chirped, filling the silence with their rhythmic song. But beneath the usual night sounds, there was something else. A whisper, a faint, wet, gurgling noise in the darkness. Ploy woke with a start. Her throat was dry, her skin clammy with sweat. Something had pulled her from her sleep, though she couldn't say what. Slowly, she sat up, straining her ears. The room was dark, the only light coming from the small oil lamp near the door. The others were still asleep. She hesitated before swinging her legs over the bed and walking toward the window. Outside, the jungle swayed, but not with the wind. The trees moved unnaturally, as if something unseen was shifting through them. Then, at the very edge of the tree line, she saw it. A figure, tall, unmoving, its outline barely discernible against the darkness. But its eyes burned red, glowing like embers in the night. Ploy's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, her heart hammering. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head. When she dared to look again, nothing. Just the dark jungle. She clutched the amulet around her neck, muttering a prayer under her breath. We shouldn't be here. Outside, the jungle exhaled, and in the distance, hidden beneath the rustling leaves, something laughed. Chapter 2. The First Omen. The jungle awoke before the sun. A thick mist rolled through the village, clinging to the wooden houses like ghostly fingers. The night's unsettling quiet had been replaced with the distant calls of birds and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures in the trees. The humid air carried the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like rusted iron. Inside the guest house, Ploy sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the window where she had seen the glowing red eyes the night before. Her hands trembled slightly as she held onto the amulet around her neck, its golden surface warm against her skin. She hadn't told the others. They wouldn't believe her. Benz would mock her, and Nate would dismiss it as paranoia. Wynn might listen, but he'd try to rationalize it. Only Fa, perhaps, would understand. But the words refused to leave Ploy's mouth. Instead, she forced herself to push the fear aside as the others woke up one by one. Ugh, my back is killing me, Benz groaned, stretching. I swear this bed is cursed. Maybe it's a sign that we shouldn't be here, Ploy murmured. Ben scoffed. Oh great, here we go again with the superstition. Fa yawned, rubbing her eyes. I barely slept. It felt like someone was whispering outside all night. Ploy stiffened. You heard it too? Fa gave her a small, hesitant nod. Yeah, it sounded wet, like something was breathing through water, Wynn added absent-mindedly as he rummaged through his bag. When he turned and saw Ploy's pale face, he frowned. What's wrong? Nothing, Ploy lied. Nate clapped his hands together. All right, let's eat and get going. We've got a shrine to find. Ploy wanted to protest, but the others were already moving. She swallowed her fear and followed. The path to the shrine. The villagers watched in silence as they left the guest house. Some whispered prayers under their breath, while others turned away completely, as if pretending not to see them would erase their presence. Crew Chai was nowhere to be found. The jungle path was narrow, barely a trail, with thick vines twisting around towering trees. The deeper they walked, the more the sunlight struggled to pierce through the canopy, leaving them in an eerie, green-tinted twilight. Fa of a tree as they passed. "It feels colder here." No one answered. Ahead, Nate led the way, excitement buzzing through him. If the shrine really hasn't been touched in decades, we might be the first ones to document it. This could be huge. Ben smirked. "What if we find a lost treasure?" Wynn chuckled. "Or a ghost?" Ploy didn't laugh. She felt the jungle watching them. The air was too still. No birds, no insects, only their footsteps crunching against the dry leaves. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A dull thump. They all froze. Another thump. Closer. It sounded wet. Heavy. Then came the whispering. Faint, almost carried by the wind, but distinct enough to make their skin crawl. Ploy grabbed Fa's hand. "We need to go back." Before anyone could respond, a low, guttural growl rumbled from the shadows between the trees. And then they saw it. A figure stood about 10 meters ahead, half hidden by the trees. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too thin, its head tilted at an odd angle. Its long black hair draped over its face, but through the strands, something gleamed. Teeth. Long, jagged teeth, stretching into a grin. Fa gasped. Wynn cursed under his breath. Benz took a step forward. "What the..." The figure twitched, and then it disappeared. Not into the trees, not into the shadows. It simply vanished. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nate laughed. "Holy shit, that was awesome. Did you guys see that? Please tell me someone recorded that." Ploy grabbed his arm. "Nate, we need to leave. Now." Nate shrugged her off. "Relax. It's probably just a local messing with us." But when he turned back toward the path, his face paled. The shrine was in front of them. It hadn't been there a second ago. The shrine. The structure was ancient, its wooden beams blackened with age and decay. Vines snaked their way across the crumbling walls, wrapping around faded carvings of grotesque, leering faces. The roof had partially caved in, exposing jagged beams like broken ribs. An overwhelming stench filled the air, rotting wood, damp earth, and something foul, like meat left out in the sun. The doors, once intricately carved, now stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness within. Ploy's breath hitched. Something was inside, watching. Ben stepped forward, grinning. "Well, since we're here..." "Ben's don't," Fa whispered. But he was already moving. With a casual push, he shoved open the doors. The shrine sighed. A rush of stale air escaped from within, thick with decay. The shadows inside seemed to shift unnaturally, as if something had just slithered out of sight. Nate held up his camera. "This is incredible. Imagine the history buried here." Wynn hesitated. "I don't think we should be here, man." "You guys are so dramatic," Ben scoffed, stepping inside. "It's just an abandoned..." His foot crunched on something. He looked down. A tooth. Small. Human. Ploy sucked in a sharp breath, and then, from deep within the shrine, something whispered. Low. Gurgling. Hungry. Ploy grabbed Nate's arm. "We need to leave. Now." Nate hesitated, and then the doors slammed shut behind them. A low, raspy breath echoed in the darkness. They were not alone. Chapter 3. The Whispering Darkness. A deafening silence fell over the group as the shrine doors slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, no one moved. Ploy's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her fingers dug into Nate's arm, but he didn't shove her away this time. The air inside was thick, too thick, like the walls were pressing in, suffocating them. Then came the whispering, soft at first, slithering through the shadows, like a cold breath against their ears. The words were in Thai, but the dialect was ancient, foreign, twisted. Leave. It is watching. It is hungry. Fa whimpered, clutching her arms as if trying to keep the voices out. Wynn's face was pale, his eyes darting around the room, searching for a source. Benz laughed, a nervous, forced laugh. All right, you guys heard that right. Please tell me someone else heard that. No one answered. A loud thud echoed from the back of the shrine. Then another. The floor creaked as something moved. Slow. Deliberate. Ploy felt her stomach twist. They were not alone. She forced herself to look around. The shrine's interior was ancient, its wooden beams warped with age, black mold creeping up the walls. Faded murals lined the ceiling, depicting scenes of monks bowing before something monstrous. Their faces had been scratched out, leaving only hollow voids. And then there was the altar. It stood at the far end of the room, draped in decayed red cloth, blackened with old blood. In the center sat a statue. It was supposed to be a deity, but something was wrong. Its face was chipped away, revealing only a gaping mouth, frozen in a grotesque scream. Ploy's knees felt weak. Something terrible had happened here. Nate swallowed hard, his camera trembling in his grip. We should document this. Nate, are you insane? Va hissed. Something is here with us. Before he could answer, the whispering grew louder. A sickening wet sound followed. A gurgle, like something choking on blood. Then came the scraping. Fingernails, dragging along wood. Wynn took a slow step back. We need to leave. Benz turned toward the doors, gripping the handle. He yanked hard. They wouldn't budge. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. Then, out of the darkness, a hand. It shot out from behind the altar, pale and bloated, fingers twisted backward. The nails were black, jagged, caked with dirt. It gripped the floor, pulling something forward, something that should not exist. A face emerged, rotted, stretched too long, the skin sagging as if melted. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of jagged teeth, too many teeth. The eyes, empty sockets, but something moved inside them, wriggling. Ploy's scream died in her throat. The figure twitched, snapped, convulsed. Its head tilted at an impossible angle as it dragged itself forward. You should not have come. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from everywhere. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. Straight for them. Ploy shoved Fa toward the doors. Run. Benz slammed his shoulder into the wooden doors, desperation turning into raw panic. Wynn grabbed a broken wooden beam and swung it blindly. The thing screeched, its voice a distorted, inhuman wail. Then, the doors burst open. They tumbled outside, crashing onto the damp earth. Fa gasped, dragging herself up. Where is it? Ploy turned back. The shrine was silent. The doors, now wide open, revealed only darkness. The whispering was gone. Nate, panting, stared at the building. What the hell was that? Ploy shook her head. We need to leave. Now. Wynn helped Fa to her feet. Benz, still pale, muttered, Yeah, let's go. As they hurried down the jungle path, none of them noticed the figure standing just inside the shrine, watching, smiling, waiting. And in the trees, the whispers returned. Chapter 4. The Mark of the Cursed. The group ran. Their breaths came in short, panicked gasps as they tore through the jungle, their feet sinking into the damp earth with every frantic step. The whispers followed them, weaving through the trees, crawling into their ears like slithering insects. Ploy could still see it. That thing, its grotesque, stretched face, its hollow sockets filled with writhing darkness. The image was burned into her mind, and no matter how fast they ran, she couldn't escape it. Va tripped on a root, crashing onto the ground. Shit! Wynn grabbed her arm and hauled her up. Keep moving! I can't, she panted, clutching her side. I feel sick. Ploy turned to help, but froze. Something was wrong. Va's skin, it was changing. A deep, dark bruise had spread across her forearm, veiny and unnatural, like rot creeping under her skin. Va, Ploy whispered, her throat tightening. What happened to your arm? Va looked down and screamed. The bruise pulsed, dark tendrils spreading. Nate swore under his breath. What the hell is that? Va's breathing became erratic, her body shaking. I don't know. It hurts. Benz took a step back. What if she's infected with whatever the hell was in that shrine? Wynn glared at him. Don't say that. She's marked, Ploy murmured. They all turned to her. Ploy felt her stomach churn as a memory surfaced, a warning from her grandmother, told in the hushed whispers long ago. The cursed ones, they are marked first. The spirits do not kill immediately. No, they let the rot sink in. They let the fear fester. The body will decay, while the soul is eaten away. Va grabbed Ploy's wrist. Please, she whimpered. Help me. Ploy swallowed the rising panic in her throat. They needed help. She turned toward the village. We have to go back. Benz scoffed. Are you crazy? The villagers didn't even want us here in the first place. She's getting worse, Wynn snapped. We don't have a choice. A deep crack echoed through the trees. They froze. The jungle had gone silent. The whispers were gone. The rustling leaves had stilled. Even the air itself felt dead. Then a low, wet gurgle came from behind them. Ploy turned, and her blood ran cold. In the distance, standing between the trees, was the figure. Its head twitched. Its mouth hung open, too wide, too long. And then it moved, fast, faster than anything human, straight for them. Run, Ploy screamed. They bolted. The village was close, so close. They could see the rooftops through the trees, the faint flicker of firelight. The thing shrieked behind them, its voice splitting the air like shattered glass. Va sobbed, clutching her arm as she stumbled forward. She was slowing down. Ploy turned back. Va, hurry! It was too late. The creature lunged. Its clawed hand snapped out and grabbed Va by the wrist. She screamed, a sound of pure agony. Wynn and Nate grabbed her, yanking her forward, breaking the creature's hold. But the damage was done. Va collapsed onto the dirt, her entire arm blackened. The veins twisted, pulsing like something inside was alive. They reached the village just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The villagers were waiting. The elders stood in a tight circle, faces grim, their eyes filled with something that sent a chill through Ploy's bones. They had been expecting this. Crew Chai stepped forward, his gaze settling on Va's trembling form. His face darkened. You should not have gone to the shrine, he said, voice low. Ploy clenched her fists. We didn't know. The old man sighed, shaking his head. Now, one of you is marked. Va whimpered, her fingers digging into the dirt. But please, help me. The villagers hesitated. Then, from deep within the crowd, an old woman stepped forward. Her frail form was wrapped in layers of cloth, her wrinkled face half hidden beneath a hood. Her voice was almost a whisper. The curse has begun. Silence. The rain fell harder, pattering against the earth, washing away the sweat and blood from their skin. Ploy's heart pounded. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Chapter 5. The Ritual of the Forsaken. The rain poured harder, turning the dirt road into thick mud as the villagers whispered among themselves. The flickering torches cast eerie shadows across their faces, expressions of fear, suspicion, and something else. Resignation. Ploy knelt beside Fa, gripping her trembling shoulders. The blackened veins had spread from her wrist to her forearm, writhing under the skin like something alive. "Somebody help her," Ploy pleaded. Crew Chai remained silent, his old, weathered face unreadable. Then the old woman who had stepped forward before, her hunched figure hidden beneath soaked robes, spoke again. "There is only one way," she whispered. Ploy's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" The villagers shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Crew Chai finally exhaled, his voice heavy. "There is an old ritual, a way to delay the curse." "Delay?" Wynn snapped. "You mean you can't cure it?" Silence. The old woman turned to Fa, her eyes filled with pity. "Once the spirit has chosen its prey, there is no escape. The mark will spread. The body will rot. The soul will be devoured." Fa sobbed, gripping her arm as if trying to hold herself together. No, I don't want to die." Benz's face was pale. "What happens if we do nothing?" The woman's lips tightened. "Then the cursed one will not remain human for much longer." A chill ran through Ploy's spine. She looked back at the villagers. "Then we do the ritual. What do we need to do?" The old woman hesitated, her fingers tightening around the wooden beads wrapped around her wrist. Finally, she spoke. "The ritual must be performed before dawn. If we fail, she will belong to it." Fa's breathing turned ragged. "Please," she whispered, "do it." The villagers reluctantly began preparing. The ritual begins. They brought Fa to an old wooden hut at the edge of the village. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of burning herbs and wax. Symbols were drawn on the walls in black ink. Some looked like ancient Thai script, but others were unrecognizable. Fa lay on a thin mat in the center of the room, her body trembling. Her skin had gone grayish, the dark veins reaching her shoulder. The old woman stood over her, whispering a prayer as she spread a mixture of herbs over Fa's forehead. Crew Chai knelt beside them, clutching a dagger wrapped in red cloth. "What is that for?" Wynn asked, his voice tense. Crew Chai didn't look up. "A sacrifice must be made." Benz's face twisted. "You didn't mention that before." Crew Chai finally met their eyes. "The spirit has already claimed her. To weaken its grip, we must offer it something else in return." Ploy's stomach twisted. "What kind of sacrifice?" The old woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached into a clay bowl and pulled out a small, struggling chicken. Its eyes were wide, its wings flapping weakly. Ploy exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. An animal sacrifice. But the relief was short-lived, because when the old woman spoke, her words chilled Ploy to the bone. "This is only the first offering. The second must be given by her." Everyone turned to Fa. She blinked through fevered eyes. What? "The spirit has touched you," the old woman whispered. "To break the link, you must cut away the mark." The room fell silent. Fa stared at them, her breathing shallow. "You want me to cut off my arm?" Crew Chai's face darkened. "It is the only way." "No," Benz muttered, shaking his head. "No way. That's insane." Nate clenched his fists. "There has to be another way." The old woman ignored them. She placed the dagger in Fa's trembling hands. If you wish to live, you must do this before dawn. Fa looked down at the blade. Her grip tightened. She sobbed. Ploy reached for her. Fa, you don't have to do this. But before she could finish, Fa screamed. Her body convulsed, her back arching unnaturally. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth stretching open, too wide. From her throat came a sound that was not human, a wet, gurgling laugh. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hut, and the whispering returned. Chapter 6. The Possession. The hut plunged into darkness. The flickering candlelight vanished, swallowed by something unnatural. The air turned suffocating, thick with the scent of burning wax and decay. Then came the whispers. Not outside, not in the jungle, inside the room. They slithered through the blackness, weaving around them, brushing against their ears like invisible fingers. Ploy's breath hitched. Light, we need light. Nate fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed horror. Fa was no longer on the mat. She hovered, her back arched, her limbs twisted unnaturally, her fingers curled like claws. Her body convulsed, jerking violently as though being puppeteered by something unseen. Her eyes, they were all black. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness. Then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. It was something else, something ancient, something hungry. It's Epmshing Chanelv, Aimi Loitoat. She is mine now. There is no escape. A guttural laugh followed, wet, gurgling, like something rotting was trying to mimic human speech. The old woman stumbled back, chanting a desperate prayer. Kruchai grabbed a talisman, pressing it against Fa's forehead. Her body jerked violently. A horrifying screech tore from her throat, warping into something inhuman. Her mouth stretched, too wide, too deep. Her jaw cracked as if it would unhinge completely. And then, she dropped. Her body hit the wooden floor with a sickening thud. Silence. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Ploy took a shaky step forward. Fa. No response. Ploy knelt beside her friend, heart pounding. Fa, can you hear me? Still nothing. Wind swallowed hard. Is she? Before he could finish, Fa's body twitched. Then she sat up, slowly, too slowly, her head tilted to the side, unnaturally far. Her lips curled into a smile. Ploy. Her voice was not right. Lower, distorted, echoing. Ploy's hands trembled. Fa. Fa's black eyes gleamed. It hurts. Her smile widened. Then her hand shot out, grabbing Ploy's wrist, cold. Her fingers felt like ice. Ploy screamed, trying to yank herself free, but Fa's grip was inhumanly strong. Let go of her. Wynn lunged forward, grabbing Fa's shoulders. But the moment his hands touched her, she turned on him. With a sickening crack, Fa's jaw unhinged completely, and she lunged. Wynn barely had time to react before her teeth sank into his shoulder. He screamed. Blood splattered across the floor. Kruchai grabbed the talisman again and slammed it against Fa's forehead. She shrieked. Her body convulsed violently. Black veins pulsed beneath her skin, writhing like worms. Then, she collapsed. The aftermath Ploy gasped for breath, her entire body trembling. Wynn clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face pale. The villagers stared in horror. The old woman knelt beside Fa's unconscious form, pressing trembling fingers to her pulse. She is still alive, she whispered. Benz let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? Kru Chai's expression was grim. She is no longer just Fa. The spirit has begun to take root inside her. Ploy's throat tightened. Can we still save her? Silence. Then the old woman exhaled. There is only one way. Ploy's hands curled into fists. Tell us. The old woman met her eyes. We must return to the shrine. The words hit like a death sentence. Ben swore under his breath. You mean the same shrine that got us into this mess? The spirit's grip grows stronger, the woman murmured. If we do not act soon, Fa will be lost, and the spirit will claim another. Ploy's chest tightened. They had no choice. They had to go back to the cursed shrine, where it was waiting. Chapter 7. Return to the cursed shrine. The jungle was silent, too silent. Even the usual sounds of insects and distant animals were absent, as if the forest itself knew what was coming. Ploy gripped the flashlight, her knuckles turning white. Fa was unconscious, her face pale and drenched in sweat, as Win and Nate carried her between them. The black veins crawling up her arm had spread to her neck. She was running out of time. Kru Chai led the group, his lantern casting eerie shadows on the trees. The old woman followed behind him, clutching a bundle of talisman-covered cloth. We must move quickly, she whispered. The spirit knows we are coming. Benz glanced around, his fingers twitching. Yeah, then why do I feel like it's already here? No one answered. Because they felt it too. Something was watching them. Something hungry. The path to darkness. The closer they got to the shrine, the worse the air became. It felt thick, wrong, like walking through something invisible, something that pressed against their skin and sank into their lungs. Win stumbled, almost dropping Fa. Shit, I feel dizzy. Nate wiped his forehead. He was sweating. It's the spirit, isn't it? The old woman's voice was grim. Yes, it does not want us here. Ploy swallowed hard. She could feel it now too, a creeping pressure in her chest, like something was pulling her down. Then, suddenly, the trees shifted. No, not the trees, the shadows. They moved, stretched unnaturally, flickering without wind. And then, a whisper, not from one direction, from everywhere. Soft, taunting. You will not survive. No one will survive. Ploy's breath hitched. Did you hear that? Benz's face was pale. I wish I didn't. Then Fa twitched. They all froze. She twitched again. Then her head snapped up. Too fast, too unnatural. Her eyes were still closed, but her mouth opened, and she spoke. Ploy's stomach twisted. She had read about them before. Ghosts filled with endless rage, cursed to haunt the living. The spirit's mouth opened, and she laughed, low, hollow, echoing from everywhere at once. Then she moved, not walked, not ran, glided. One moment she was at the edge of the trees. The next, she was inches away from them. Benz screamed, "Run!" A race against death. The group bolted. They crashed through the jungle, branches slashing their arms, feet sinking into the wet earth. But the spirit was faster. No footsteps, no sound, just her smiling face appearing between the trees. Closer, closer. Win gritted his teeth, still gripping Fa's unconscious body. We're not gonna make it. The shrine, Kru Chai shouted. It's the only safe place. Then, the trees opened up, and there it was, the cursed shrine. Its decayed wooden structure sat in the clearing, surrounded by rotting offerings, wilted flowers, burnt incense, skulls. The spirit's laughter rang in their ears. She was right behind them. Kru Chai grabbed a talisman and threw it to the ground. Now, the old woman screamed a chant, hurling powder into the air. And the moment they crossed into the shrine's grounds, the spirit stopped. Her body froze midair, inches away from the entrance. Then, her black eyes snapped to Fa, and she whispered, "Manyangaimchp, it is not over." Then her body melted into the shadows, and the jungle went silent once more. Chapter 8: The Ritual of Chains. The shrine was breathing, or at least it felt like it. The wooden walls groaned as if something inside them was alive, shifting, waiting. Ploy's breath came in shallow gasps. They had made it. They had escaped the spirit, for now. But Fa, she still wasn't waking up. Her body lay limp in the center of the shrine, her skin cold, black veins snaking up her throat. Her lips moved slightly, forming words too soft to hear. Kru Chai knelt beside her, carefully unwrapping the bundle of cloth the old woman had carried. Inside were ancient iron chains, covered in talismans. "These are sacred," he murmured. "They will hold the spirit back, but only for a while." Benz clenched his fists. "You mean that thing's still inside her?" The old woman's eyes darkened. "It is, and it is angry." Outside, the jungle was silent, too silent. Then, bang, a single knock against the shrine's wooden wall. Slow, deliberate. Ploy's stomach tightened. "It's still out there." Kru Chai ignored it. He took the chains and began wrapping them around Fa's wrists, her ankles, her neck. As soon as the last talisman was placed, Fa's body jerked. Her back arched violently, a guttural screech tearing from her throat. Then, her eyes snapped open, black, pure black, and her mouth. It curled into a smile, not Fa's smile. Something else was looking at them now, something ancient, something hungry. "Yukana Renjan, foolish humans." The voice was not Fa's. It was layered, echoing, twisting. Ploy's hands trembled. "It can still talk." Kru Chai tightened his grip on the talisman. "It will say anything to break you. Do not listen." But the spirit was laughing, a low, gurgling laugh. Fa's lips twisted as she turned her head toward Ploy. "Do you really think she can be saved?" Ploy's breath hitched. The spirit's black eyes glittered. "She's already mine." The ritual begins. Kru Chai ignored it, chanting under his breath. The old woman joined him, their voices weaving together in an ancient incantation. The air shimmered, the candles flickered, their flames bending unnaturally. Then Fa screamed, a high, inhuman wail that rattled the shrine walls. The chains tightened on their own, pulling against her body. Her flesh burned where the talismans touched. The spirit was fighting back. The wind howled outside, shaking the wooden structure. The jungle groaned as if something massive was moving through it. Then, a new voice, a whisper, but it was not coming from Fa. It was coming from above. Ploy's blood ran cold. Something was on the ceiling. Slowly, her eyes lifted, and her heart stopped. A face, hanging upside down, staring at her. Its grin was too wide. Its blackened nails dug into the wood, its body twisted in a way no human could survive. Then, it lunged. "The demon awakens," Ploy screamed. The others spun around, but the thing was already moving. It slithered down the wall, limbs bending like a spider's, crawling towards them with impossible speed. Benz grabbed a torch and swung. The flame passed right through it. The spirit laughed. Then it opened its mouth, and darkness poured out. Not smoke, not mist, something alive. It spread like a disease, black veins crawling along the shrine walls, reaching for them. The ritual, keep going, Kruchai shouted. The old woman threw powder into the air. The moment it touched the spirit, it shrieked, recoiling. Ploy grabbed a talisman and slammed it onto Fa's forehead. Fa's body convulsed violently. The black veins stopped spreading. The spirit hissed, and then it vanished. The jungle went silent. The air cleared. Ploy's chest heaved. They had won. Or so they thought. The final omen. Wynn exhaled, dropping to his knees. Is it over? The old woman hesitated. For now. Ploy turned to Fa. Her body was still. The black veins were fading. She was breathing. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open. Normal. Brown. Fa. Ploy grabbed her hand. You're back. Fa's lips parted. She looked at Ploy. Then she smiled and whispered, Manyang Yutini. It's still here. The candles went out. The shrine plunged into darkness. Chapter 9. It hides among us. The shrine was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that suffocates. Ploy's breath hitched as she stared at Fa. Her best friend sat up slowly, rubbing her temples, her face pale but normal. Or at least, it looked normal. But Ploy remembered what Fa had whispered just before the candles went out. It's still here. The words clung to her mind like a parasite, refusing to leave. No one spoke. No one moved. Outside, the jungle loomed, black and endless. The trees stood like silent sentinels, watching, waiting. The old woman's voice broke the silence. It tricked us. Kruchai clenched his fists. The ritual was incomplete. Wynn wiped his face, his hands trembling. Then where the hell is it? The old woman lowered her gaze. Then she whispered, inside one of us. A dangerous suspicion. The group froze. A cold, creeping dread settled over them. Wynn swallowed hard. What do you mean? The old woman's face was grim. The spirit was not destroyed. It is hiding. Benz let out a nervous laugh. Hiding? You mean like possessing someone? The old woman nodded. Benz stiffened. Wait. You're not saying. She turned to the group. One of you is not who they seem. Silence. A thick, unbearable silence. Then, Ploy felt it. A shift in the air. A presence. Something was watching them, listening. Fa's voice was soft. You think it's inside me? Everyone turned to her. The girl shrank under their stares. Her skin was still pale, her body still weak from the ritual. But she looked normal. Ploy wanted to believe it, but doubt had already started to take root. What if it wasn't over? What if Fa wasn't really Fa? Benz's fingers twitched toward his pocket knife. We need to be sure. Fa's eyes widened. Wait, you don't think? Just a test, Wynn muttered. We have to know. Kruchai pulled out a small vial of holy water. He uncorked it. The air grew heavy. The old woman whispered a chant, and the water began to glow faintly. Kruchai stepped toward Fa. She flinched. That was all it took. Benz grabbed his knife. It's her. Fa's breath hitched. No. Wynn took a step back. Nate's fingers twitched. Ploy's heart pounded. Was it really her? Kruchai hesitated. Then he flicked the water. A single drop landed on Fa's forehead. The entire group held their breath. The drop rolled down her skin. Nothing happened. Silence. Wynn let out a shaky breath. She's clean. Benz exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Shit. Fa looked at them with hurt in her eyes. You all thought it was me. No one answered. Because because the real question was even worse. If it's not Fa, then who is it? A presence among them. The candlelight flickered. Shadows shifted unnaturally on the shrine walls. Kru Chai's face was pale. We must test everyone. Ploy's stomach twisted. One by one, they stepped forward. One by one, the holy water touched their skin. Nothing. No reaction. Until it was Benz's turn. He hesitated. Kru Chai frowned. Come forward. Benz clenched his jaw. This is stupid. Wynn narrowed his eyes. Just do it, man. Ploy watched Benz carefully. He was shaking. And then Benz bolted. He turned and ran for the door. Too fast. Too unnatural. The realization hit Ploy like ice. It was him. The demon was inside Benz. The reveal. The old woman screamed. Stop him. Wynn lunged, but Benz was already at the door. The wooden doors burst open, and the jungle swallowed him. Darkness, leaves rustling, then silence. Kru Chai cursed under his breath. It's free. Fa stared at the open doorway, her hands trembling. What do we do? The old woman's voice was a whisper. We hunt it. Ploy's chest tightened. They had come to the shrine to escape the demon, but now they had to chase it into the dark. Chapter 10. The Hunt in the Dark. The jungle was waiting. Ploy stood at the shrine's doorway, staring into the black abyss beyond. The trees swayed gently, their shadows shifting unnaturally under the moonlight. Somewhere in that endless darkness, Benz was lurking. No, not Benz. The thing inside him. Kru Chai's voice was low and firm. We must find him before it's too late. Wynn swallowed hard. Too late for what? The old woman's face was grim. Before it fully takes control, before we lose him forever. A heavy silence fell over them. Then, without another word, they stepped into the jungle. A forest that breathes. The moment they left the shrine, the air changed. It was thicker, heavier. The jungle felt alive. Leaves whispered, though there was no wind. The ground was soft, as if something had been moving beneath it. Ploy gripped the talisman in her pocket. He couldn't have gotten far. Wynn clenched his fists. Then why do I feel like he's watching us? No one answered, because they all felt it. Something was near. Something was waiting. The first sign, they moved cautiously, their flashlights flickering against the tangled vines. Then, a sound, a low, wet dripping. Ploy's breath hitched. She turned her flashlight toward the trees and froze. Hanging from the branches were shreds of fabric. Benz's shirt, and below it, a single bloody footprint. Fa gasped. He's hurt. Kru Chai's face darkened. No, it's playing with us. The jungle shuddered, and then, from somewhere ahead, a voice. Benz's voice. Soft, distant. Ploy, help me. The trap Ploy's chest tightened. It was him, but something was wrong. The voice was too calm, too controlled. Wynn grabbed her arm. Wait, we don't know if that's really him. Ploy hesitated. Then, another sound. Branches snapping. Something moving. Please, I don't know what's happening. His voice was closer now. Wynn raised his flashlight. Benz. A shadow shifted between the trees. Then, Benz stepped into the light. His clothes were torn, his body thin and shaking, his eyes wide and scared. But something was off. His feet were bare, the bloody footprint. It wasn't his. Ploy's stomach dropped. Benz, she whispered, where are your shoes? He smiled. Not Benz's smile. Something else. Then his mouth stretched too wide, and he lunged. The possessed Ploy barely dodged as Benz moved with inhuman speed. Wynn yelled as Benz slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. His fingers dug into Wynn's shoulders, too strong, too unnatural. Fa screamed. Crew Chai grabbed a talisman and pressed it against Benz's forehead. Zzz. Benz shrieked. His body convulsed violently. Black veins crawled up his neck, his skin burning where the talisman touched. The old woman began chanting. Benz's head snapped toward her, but it wasn't Benz anymore. His eyes turned black, his lips curled, and then he spoke, not in his voice, but in all of theirs, at once, layered, twisting, mocking. Fools, you think you can banish me? Ploy's stomach twisted. It was no longer hiding. The spirit had fully awakened. The final choice. Benz's body shuddered violently. His arms twisted at unnatural angles, bones snapping but showing no pain. Then, his head tilted back, his mouth opening wide, and from deep inside his throat, a shadow began crawling out, a mass of black tendrils, twisting, writhing, trying to escape. Crew Chai's voice was sharp. We must exorcise it now. Ploy hesitated, because if they did, Benz might not survive. Fa's hands trembled. There has to be another way, but the spirit laughed, and in Benz's own voice, it whispered, "Kill me, and he dies with me." Silence. The jungle watched, waiting for their answer. Ploy's heart pounded. She had to choose, and whatever she chose, there was no turning back. Chapter 11. The Exorcism. The jungle held its breath. Benz's body twitched violently, his limbs bending at unnatural angles. His mouth hung open, and from within, a writhing darkness slithered out. The spirit inside him was awake. Crew Chai's grip on his talisman tightened. His voice was firm, but urgent. We must act now, or he will be lost forever. But Ploy hesitated. Fa's voice was trembling. There has to be another way. We can't just... The spirit laughed. It sounded like all of them speaking at once. Twisted, warped. Exorcise me, and your friend dies with me. The words slithered into their minds, planting doubt. Wynn wiped sweat from his forehead. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stand. You're lying. The spirit tilted Benz's head unnaturally. His lips curled into a slow, sick grin. Are you sure? Then, Ben screamed, his own voice, raw, terrified. Help me. Ploy's chest tightened. It was him, the real Benz. Still in there, still fighting. She clenched her fists. They had to save him. But how? A desperate plan. The old woman took a deep breath. We have one option. Crew Chai nodded. A direct exorcism, but it's dangerous. Fa's eyes widened. Dangerous how? The old woman's voice was grim. If we fail, it will consume him completely. Silence. Ploy looked at Benz, thrashing in the dirt. His body was breaking apart, his veins blackened, his skin turning cold. They were running out of time. Wynn exhaled. We have to try. Crew Chai pulled out a dagger. The blade was ancient, covered in etched prayers. This is the only way. He pressed it into Ploy's hands. Her fingers tightened around the hilt. What do I do? She whispered. The old woman's face was unreadable. You must cut him. Ploy froze. What? Crew Chai's expression was grim. A blood sacrifice will weaken the spirit, but it has to be you. Ploy's breath came fast. Her heart pounded. She looked down at Ben's. His eyes, the real Ben's, locked onto hers. A silent plea. Do it. Ploy raised the knife. Then, she slashed. Blood and shadow. The dagger sliced across Benz's arm. The moment his blood hit the ground, the jungle screamed. Wind howled through the trees, shaking the earth. The sky darkened unnaturally, as if something ancient and unseen was awakening. And then, the spirit shrieked. It burst from Benz's throat, black tendrils writhing violently. Ploy stumbled back. The thing was crawling out of him, piece by piece. Crew Chai slammed a talisman onto Benz's forehead. The old woman began chanting. Faster, louder. The demon convulsed, its form unraveling. It let out a piercing wail, and then silence. Benz's body collapsed. The darkness was gone. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Benz gasped. He was breathing. Va let out a choked sob and fell to her knees beside him. He's alive. Ploy's entire body shook. It was over. Or so they thought. The final horror. Crew Chai's breath hitched. The old woman's eyes widened. Then, she whispered, "No." Ploy's stomach twisted. She turned and saw it. A shadow, lingering, floating above the trees. Watching them, the spirit had left Benz, but it wasn't gone. It had been set free. And now, it was waiting for a new host. And slowly, its eyes turned toward Ploy. Chapter 12. The final night. The jungle was silent. Too silent. Ploy's breath came fast as she stared at the shadow hovering above the trees. It had left Benz, but it wasn't gone. It was free. And now, it was looking for a new host. The air turned heavy, thick with something unnatural. The sky above was wrong, darker than night, heavier than a storm. And then, it moved, the shadow's choice. The spirit drifted down slowly, tendrils of black smoke twisting like fingers reaching for flesh. Crew Chai's voice was sharp. Nobody move. The old woman's hands tightened around her talisman. The air vibrated with something unseen. Ploy couldn't breathe. The thing was staring at her. No, not staring, choosing. And it had chosen her. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Wynn whispered, "Don't let it in." But the spirit was already inside her head. It spoke without speaking, a voice that wasn't a voice. "I know what you want." Her hands trembled. "I can give it to you." Lies. Ploy bit her tongue, trying to block it out. But the spirit's whispers grew louder. "I can fix everything. I can make them love you. I can make you powerful." Her mother's voice, mocking her. Her father's voice, distant, gone. Her own doubts, echoing back at her. "You're nothing without me." Ploy squeezed her eyes shut. No, it wasn't real. It was trying to break her. The jungle shook. Crew Chai's chanting grew louder. The spirit screamed, and then it lunged. Possession. It happened too fast. The black mass slammed into Ploy's chest. A force like drowning in ink. Like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Like her body no longer belonged to her. Wynn yelled her name. Fa screamed. Benz, still too weak to move, gasped in horror. And then, Ploy opened her eyes. They were black. Trapped inside, Ploy could see everything. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't fight. She was a prisoner inside her own body. And the thing inside her, it laughed. Her lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. Finally, Va stepped back in terror. Wynn's hands shook. Crew Chai's eyes hardened. She's still in there. We can still save her. The spirit laughed again. It took a slow, deliberate step forward. And then it attacked. The last fight. The spirit moved Ploy's body with unnatural speed. She lunged at Wynn. He barely dodged. Va grabbed a fallen branch and swung. The spirit caught it midair. A sickening crack. The wood shattered. The spirit grinned. Va fell back, trembling. Ploy screamed inside her own mind. She was still there, trapped, buried, fighting. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of something. A voice, not the spirit's, her own. And it was whispering, "Fight, the ritual of fire." Crew Chai moved fast. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small clay jar. Inside, sacred oil. Win, hold her down. Win hesitated. That was Ploy. But then her head snapped toward him, and she smiled. Too wide, too wrong. He swallowed his fear and tackled her to the ground. Ploy's body thrashed violently. The spirit inside her screamed. Crew Chai smeared the oil onto Ploy's forehead. Then she lit a match. A single flame flickered in the darkness. The spirit howled, and Crew Chai whispered the final words of the ritual. Return to the abyss. She dropped the match, flames and shadows. The moment the fire touched Ploy's skin, the spirit burst out of her. It shrieked, thrashing violently, its form warping, twisting. Crew Chai threw a final talisman onto the burning mass. The jungle exploded with wind and a light. Ploy collapsed, gasping for breath. The spirit's wail grew weaker, and then it was gone. For the first time that night, the jungle was silent. Dawn, the first light of morning, broke through the trees. Va held Ploy's hand, tears in her eyes. Win sat beside Ben's, too exhausted to speak. Crew Chai whispered a final prayer. The nightmare was over. But as Ploy looked at the burnt talisman on the ground, she felt a chill. Because deep inside her, she could still hear it. A whisper. Soft. Distant. I will return. The end.